Well, now that you've created a couple of animations, I'm going to show you how to set up the animator controller. And why do you need to set up the animator controller? Well, in the previous video, the animations you created are called, technically, animation clips. Now, in video games, you need to keep changing between these animations, right? So who is going to change this? That's the animator controller. But before you can change using the animator controller, you need to set up the animator controller. And all of this setup happens inside the animator window. And the process involves creating animation states and transitions. Well, these are all technical terms, but don't worry. Once you finish this video, I'm sure all of this will be comfortable for you. Transitions are changes between animations. And these transitions or changes happen according to conditions, which are kind of managed by parameters. And parameters are variables that you define in the animator window. Let's begin by understanding what animation clips and animator controller look like. The animation clips and animation controller are in the animations cat folder. You can zoom in so you can have a better view. And let me introduce you to these guys. The icons which have the play button kind of thing, these are animation clips, the same animations that you created in the previous videos. And this guy is the animator controller. This animator controller will help you in managing changes between these animations. First, let's rename this to cat because this controller is connected with the cat game object here. And you can verify by clicking cat, look in the inspector, and where you have the animator here, have a look, you have a controller. And when you click this controller, notice the controller is waving at you from the project window. Okay, so it's confirmed that this animator controller belongs to this cat game object. Next, I want to show you that to work with all of these, you need to have the animator window. You can launch the animator window in two ways. The longer way is you click window and click animator. This opens the animator window, and then you'll have to select the controller you want to work with like so, and all of these items will appear. Well, there's a better way. You close this, you simply double click the controller, and there, boom, everything appears in an instant. This is my preferred way, and I will use this throughout this course. Next, let's see what we have in this window. You can see there are a couple of boxes. Two of these are gray, and if you notice, they have running and jump written on them. So are these the animation clips? Well, technically these guys are called animation states. Think of them as boxes which hold these animation clips, and I'll talk about them shortly. Let me show you that there is a auto live link here. If you turn it off and you play the animations, you'll not be able to see which is the current animation being played. So make sure that this auto live link is on. Then this window has layers and parameters, two tabs. Okay. For this course, I only will be working with parameters. This will be covered somewhere else or maybe in an update to this course. Parameters will help you define conditions, and I'll shortly talk about these. Let's have a look at what this piece of text here means. Okay. Now, when you have the animator window open, it's simply a visual representation of a controller. By having a look at this piece of text, you can tell in an instant which controller is this. So in this case, have a look. We are in the animations cat folder, and there's a cat controller. And that's exactly what this text tells you. So now you know what this text is. Also remember, this is the visual representation of the content of the controller. Or in simpler terms, anything that's inside the controller is reflected in the animator window. So if I ask you what is inside the cat controller, you can tell me that there's an orange box, there's a green box, and you have a light bluish kind of box, and then you have two gray boxes, and you also have this arrow. Next, I'll tell you the technical names of these boxes and what this arrow is, and how to make these boxes, how to work with these boxes, why do you need these boxes, okay? Basically the concept of animation states and transitions coming up next. These boxes are technically called animation states. And why do I call them boxes? Because they contain something. And what do they contain? These animation clips, all right? These are containers for these animation clips. Let me show you. Select the running animation, and in the inspector, you notice you have the motion property. Click on the running here and there. The running animation clip starts to wave at you. Select jump and click the jump here, and you'll notice the animation clip is waving at you. And you can try this with idle and all the same. So now you've seen these are containers for these animation clips. My next question is, if I delete these containers, will these animation clips be deleted too? Let me delete the jump. Now imagine if this was an accidental delete. You did not want to delete it, but hey, it's good news, right? The jump animation is still here, right here. So that takes off the worry from you. If you accidentally delete one of the animation states, the animation clip associated with it will still be there. Now let me show you how you can get it back. The best way is to hit Command Z. Let's do that one more time. There, you've got it back. Let me delete it again. I want to show you another way. You can copy this guy from here and paste it here like so, and then change the name to jump, hit return, and drag the jump animation clip here. And we're back in business. The third way is, let's delete this guy, is the longer way. You right click and select create state, empty. You select it and then name it jump. And the same way drag the animation clip jump, and done. But be careful, if you delete the animation clips completely from the hard drive, you'll have to create the animations one more time. But for the animation states, you now know how to get them back, right? Next, let me talk about transitions. Transitions are changes from one animation state to the other animation state. As an example, you want to change from idle to running during gameplay. These can only happen if there is a connection, like you see this arrow. You need to create arrows between idle, running, idle, jump, running, and jump. How can you do that? As a start, I've created and documented the process for you in a PDF file. You can download the PDF from this video. Have a look. Let's begin from the step 1. Although there's a note, but I'll come to that later. First, you need to decide the transition flow. Decide from which box or animation state to which box do you want to create the transition, okay? In this case, you want the change to happen from idle to running. So this is the from and this is the to. So select the from as it is mentioned in the step 2. Right click the from box and select make transition, and then you'll get a white arrow. Just drop it onto the to box and left click to confirm. If it sounded confusing, let me show you. Select the from box, right click, make transition. You get this white arrow. Simply take it to the to box and left click, and that's it. You've just created your transition. In step 3, you have to adjust transition properties. You can read what the changes are. I'll show you quickly. You left click the white arrow, look in the inspector, uncheck has exit time. Then you expand settings, you unchecked fixed duration, and you set this to 0. These are the steps which have been written here. Step 3 complete. When you come to step 4, this is about assigning conditions, and I'll be talking about a parameter now. The parameter is nothing but a variable, and I'll talk about the parameter shortly. First, here's a mini challenge for you. Using the process that you just saw, create a connection or a transition between idle and jump. Pause the video, go ahead and do it, and then come back. So welcome back. So the process was simple. You had to select idle, make transition. You would have got the arrow like so. You simply had to take it to jump and left click, and this creates the transition. And then you had to select the transition, uncheck has exit time, uncheck fixed duration, change this to 0, and it's always good to keep saving your project from time to time. So now you know how to create transitions. I talked about parameter, so it's time to see what parameters can do for you. Let's begin by understanding why do we require parameters. First, know that these transition arrows also have a conditions block. Okay, right now it's a list which is empty. So Have a look at your PDF. It says you need to assign a condition. It tells you to click in the inspector under conditions, the plus icon, and then you'll have a drop down. You'll have to select a parameter. Okay, we haven't created the parameter, but know that based on the conditions here, this transition will take place. That's the important thing. I repeat, based on conditions mentioned here, this transition will take place. So how do you create the conditions? You'll have to use a parameter, because right now, if I try to click the plus icon, and let me expand this, it tells you parameter does not exist in controller. And which controller are we talking about? The cat controller, this. How can we build a parameter? First, let's delete it by selecting the minus icon, and let's clear off the console. You can create a parameter by first selecting the parameters tab. You have layers and parameters. Make sure you have parameters selected. Then look at this plus icon, the tiny plus icon here. Click on it and you'll see this drop down with float, int, bool, and trigger. For this course, you'll be using an integer. So you select, and let's call this state. But for a demonstration, I'll show you, you can create float, you can create the bool, and you can also create a trigger. If you had a list of parameters, how can you tell which is boolean, which is trigger, which is float? Float will take in a decimal value. Integer will take in no decimal value. Bool has this checkbox, and trigger has this radio button. You can delete these by selecting delete or selecting and hitting command delete on the keyboard. Let's save the project. Parameters are nothing but variables which can take in values. And what do these values do for you? Well, these are the values which can cause the change. Let me show you. If I select this arrow and I click the plus icon, now you notice in the conditions block, you have this drop down where I can select the parameter state here. And I can select a logical condition. I can say that when state equals 1, this change should happen from idle to running. The animation should change from idle to running. Well, is it that easy? Yes, let me show you. Let's go to game and let's go to play mode. Watch what happens. The default animation is selected. If you're not seeing this progress bar, make sure auto live link is on. Next, change this to 1 and see what happens. Whoa, that was cool, right? The animation simply changed from idle to running. Whoa, so how do you get it back? Should I simply change this to 0 and the change happens? No. And here's a question for you. Why isn't the change happening from running to idle? Okay, that's because this is a one-way transition. There's only one arrow. What about the arrow from running to idle, or the transition from running to idle? So let's create the transition. Select the running, right click, make transition. You'll get this arrow, drop it onto idle, and now you have two arrows. Select the upper arrow, the one that's pointing from running to idle. You'll notice all of these properties. So now you know you can check has exit time, uncheck this guy and set this to 0. You'll also have the conditions block list empty. Click the plus icon and make sure you select the state and set it equals to 0. I'll also tell you why am I selecting 0, 1, and how do I figure out. Okay, I've kept that especially for the next video because this is an important process. So hit the play mode and notice the idle animation is playing. Change this to 1. The animation changes to the run animation. You can verify, and changing this back to 0 simply changes the transition from running to idle. Okay, that's the basic process of creating transitions between animation states. You can pause the video, watch this process one more time, 2 times, as many times as you want, because we will be using this process a lot in the next video, and this will become the core of your animator controller setup. So be very sure that you understand this process, and then join me in the next video where I'll show you how to use all this knowledge to configure the animations for the cat game character. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.